I'm Catharine Richert. You're listening to NPR News. Minnesota is experiencing a moment of civic intensity that feels historic. A major federal ICE operation has drawn a sustained public response. There have been massive marches, a statewide general strike. Volunteers, legal observers, and faith leaders are stepping into action. But what we're seeing today didn't appear overnight. These organizing strategies were built in the years before George Floyd's murder, and then were tested and strengthened in the protests that followed. So tonight we'll explore the historic significance of what's happening now, how past protests and civic engagement connect to today's actions, and why this is such an important moment for Minnesota. And we want to hear from you too. Are you protesting, volunteering, or observing for the first time? If you have in the past, does this moment feel different? Call us at 651-227-6000.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Rylan Barton. President Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, says he's drawing down the federal immigration enforcement surge in Minnesota by 700, though as NPR's Martin Costi reports, that still leaves 2,000 federal personnel in the state.
Homan says he's had productive discussions with local officials, especially about ICE getting notifications when county jails are about to release someone with immigration violations. State and city leaders want an immediate end to the entire operation in Minnesota, but Homan says not yet.
My goal with the support of President Trump is to achieve a complete drawdown and end this surge as soon as we can. But that is largely contingent upon the end of the illegal and threatening activities against ICE and its federal partners that we're seeing in the community.
2,000 active-duty troops in Alaska, North Carolina, and Colorado had been on alert for possible deployment to Minnesota, but they've now been told to stand down. Martin Costi, NPR News.
A man convicted of trying to assassinate President Trump on a Florida golf course in 2024 has been sentenced to life in prison. Prosecutors asked for life without parole, saying Ryan Ruth is unrepentant and has never apologized. A defense attorney brought in for his sentencing asked for 27 years. A new social media platform has Silicon Valley buzzing, but it's not for humans. Moltbook is a platform for artificial intelligence bots to talk to other chatbots. NPR's John Ruich explains.
Moltbook was launched a week ago, and it's already got more than 1.6 million bots or AI agents on it. The platform looks like Reddit, a site where people can post stuff and others can comment on it. The posts on Moltbook, though, are coming from AI agents, which are semi-autonomous computer programs. The results have been interesting. Some agents created a novel religion. Others discussed crafting a new language so they could chat in secret. And some have been complaining about the people who created them. AI agents have been controversial even before Moltbook. Proponents say they'll make life easier by handling tasks like managing email inboxes and booking travel. Critics say they can be unpredictable, even potentially dangerous. John Ruich, NPR News.
For the first time in 3 decades, the Winter Olympics will feature an entirely new sport when they officially kick off this Friday. NPR's Rachel Treisman has more on ski mountaineering.
So skimo, as the cool kids call it, has its roots in alpine countries like Switzerland, and basically it used to be kind of just a way to get around. It entails racing uphill on skis with these sticky things on the bottoms of them. Those are called climbing skins, and they basically let you go uphill with traction. And then when skiers get to the top, they have to take off their skis, throw them in their backpacks, maneuver on foot a little bit, and then rip off those skins to ski back down as fast as they can.
NPR's Rachel Treisman reporting. This is NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, celebrating a century of supporting efforts to promote a just, equitable, and sustainable society. More at mott.org/100.
For NPR News in the Twin Cities, I'm Elena C. 2 children from a Columbia Heights elementary school who were taken into ICE custody last week were returned to Minnesota today. Elizabeth Schockman reports.
The children in 2nd and 5th grade were brought to the Whipple Detention Center by school staff on Thursday last week. This happened at their mother's request after she was detained by federal agents during a court appointment. The family was flown down to a family detention center in Dilley, Texas that same day. On Wednesday, they were released and flown back to Minnesota, where their principal picked them up at the airport and brought them home. Columbia Heights school staff say the family is in good health and eager to return to classes. I'm Elizabeth Schockman.
The Minneapolis City Council has moved to boost funding for the city's immigrant legal services by $500,000. As Operation Metro Surge continues into its third month, council members said it's a necessary step to protect residents who are being separated from their families. The budget amendment will need a final vote at the full council meeting tomorrow. It is expected to pass. It's going to be a thaw across Minnesota tomorrow, too. NPR meteorologist Fen Sungard says highs will be well above normal under partly cloudy skies in the south, with a few more clouds across the north.
Temperatures are going to be in the low to mid 40s across southwestern Minnesota. There could even be a 50 around Laverne or Pipestone. Probably upper 30s, close to 40 in the Twin Cities, and 30s all the way up to the international border. Warmest temperatures in 3 weeks around here.
Sven says there will be a couple of chances for some light snow tonight and tomorrow across northeastern Minnesota. Could see 1 to 3 inches of accumulation. After a brief cool down Friday and Saturday, some milder air returns to the region next week. In sports news today, the Wild are taking on the Predators in Nashville at this hour at the end of the first. The game is tied 3-3. It's their last game before the Olympic break, and the Wild are hoping to extend their 4-game winning streak to 5. And Friday is the opening ceremony for the Winter Olympics in Milan and Cortina, Italy, although Olympic curling started today. This is NPR News.
Good evening. I'm Catharine Richert. You're listening to NPR News. Our state is experiencing a moment of civic intensity that feels historic. In the last few weeks, the Trump administration's ICE operation here has drawn a response from all corners of the state. There have been massive marches in frigid weather, a statewide general strike. Volunteers, legal observers, and faith leaders have stepped into action. But the infrastructure for this level of engagement we're seeing right now is not new. It was built in the years before George Floyd's murder, and then these organizing strategies were tested and strengthened in the protests that followed his death. So tonight, we'll explore the historical significance of what's happening now, how past protests and civic engagement connect with today's actions, and why this is such an important moment in Minnesota. And we want to hear from you, too. Are you protesting, volunteering, or observing for the first time? And if you have in the past, does this moment feel different to you? Join our conversation. Call us at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. Now I want to bring in our guests. We have Bill Convery. He is the Director of Research for the Minnesota Historical Society. Thanks for being here, Bill.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
And we have Jack Kovarek. Jack is a resident of South Minneapolis who volunteers as an operator for the Monarca Rapid Response Line. That's a community-run hotline that Minnesotans can call to report federal immigration enforcement activity. Thanks for being here, Jack.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, Bill, I want to just start with a big picture question. It really does feel like all eyes have been on Minnesota the last few weeks. I mean, we actually fielded a call from Ireland last night about what's happening here. Do you feel like this is a historic moment for our state?
That's a great question to start with, Catherine. Every time I start to think there's never been anything like this, I think of an example where there's been something like this, or at least in bits and pieces. If you look at the history of Minnesota, we have a long tradition of activism and protest going back to the beginnings of the state. So you can see it, if history isn't repeating itself, at least it's rhyming a little bit from time to time in different strikes or protests that have taken place or the formation of political movements. On the other hand, living through this, the intensity of what we're living through feels really different. And I think we're looking at a watershed moment in American history. And how this is going to turn out, I don't think we quite know yet.
And we are framing this as protests about immigration enforcement and, civic engagement around immigration. But is this actually a civil rights question in your mind?
Well, yeah, in a lot of ways, I would say that it is. Definitely there are issues of constitutionality of the rights of protesters that are involved, whether it's their First Amendment or Second Amendment rights, their Fourth Amendment or 10th Amendment rights. These are all the issues and debates that are going on right now. I think this is also a debate about what the rights of citizens are, and the rights of citizens and non-citizens are. Non-citizens are covered under the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and but we're having a debate now about whether or not to what extent that really applies to people who aren't citizens of the United States.
And Jack, as someone who is really on the ground with all of this, can you tell us more about what you're doing? What do you do as a Monarca Rapid Response Line operator?
Yeah, so I'm on the ground in a couple different ways. The Monarca line is a hotline that anyone can call if they see ICE, preferably with their own eyes. And if they're telling us secondhand, we would ask that someone call in to give firsthand. And lately, like in the last month or 6 weeks at this point, the line has figured out how to integrate with all of these hyper-local chats where people are driving around, observing, just trying to keep their eyes on ICE, because we know since before Operation Metro Surge started, even earlier activity in November, that ICE does not like to be observed, and they are much less likely to abduct someone if they're being observed. So when someone calls the line, we, as an operator, let the appropriate hyperlocal chat know so that people who are out there and can be there in a matter of minutes can go and observe. And then separately, I do a lot of observation as well, driving around in my car.
Okay, so I want to follow up with two questions here, Jack. You call these hyperlocal chats. How do you find them? This feels very decentralized, and I think that's sort of a unique feature to what we're experiencing right now. So how do you know which chat to contact, and how do you even know that it exists?
By talking to your neighbors. Yeah, that's the short answer. But they started on December 2nd. By the morning of December 2nd, there were groups of people who had already been organizing before this operation who made the first chats. There was one for Southside Minneapolis, one for Uptown and Whittier, and one for St. Paul. And very quickly, there was the need to make smaller chats. One, because signal chats cap at 1,000, and that happened pretty quickly. But also because people wanted to be able to opt in or opt out of like constantly receiving messages. So they wanted a chat that you could just send a message if you needed people to show up right now, which is what we call a salute. But if you're out observing, there's a lot more back and forth. There's checking the plates, seeing suspicious vehicles but not knowing if they're ICE, confirming that it's ICE, then letting people know that, oh, we need to send a salute, we need people to come here now. So there is a need for chats with different purposes, if that makes sense. Yeah. And then, how you would find your chat is connecting with someone in your neighborhood who's already doing rapid response. A lot of neighborhoods organize on a block captain system, and if you connect with your block captain, they could help you get into the right chat. Yeah.
And Jack, I do want to get your reaction to one of the major headlines today, of course, and that's that border czar Tom Homan, who has been in Minnesota talking to local leaders for a week now, leading ICE enforcement, says that he is going to draw down the number of agents in the state by 700. Do you think that's significant? And even just today, are you feeling that or seeing that?
It's not significant. We're still going to have somewhere between 2,000 and 2,400 agents here. When 2,000 agents came in, which was the weekend before Christmas, that was when things really started to change. And then there was another 1,000 in the new year. It's still an insane amount of federal agents for the size of a city or the Twin Cities and the surrounding suburbs. The scale is kind of hard to understand when thinking about other cities that have had operations like Chicago or LA. They had half the amount of agents as us, and they're like 10 times bigger than us. So it's not an exciting thing. And in fact, how it's felt since Alex Preddy died is how it felt the first half of December, I would say, where the agents are clearly trying to be more aloof, more secretive, really just trying to snatch people when no one is looking. They're trying to be less obvious. They're not riding around in big convoys and being like super over the top like they were after Renee was killed and when they were still being directed by Bovino. So in the one sense, it's
that's
like
Gregory Bovino, the border control chief, Greg Bovino, who had been here for a while and then left. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to clarify. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah, no problem. So there has been a vibe shift, but the shift is very much like they might not be as much in our face. They're still out there. I mean, I was commuting the other morning, I think it was yesterday morning, and just as active just as many, like following so many ICE vehicles. Like the call is so busy because people are seeing ICE at the same time. Like, and people are still being abducted. I mean, someone who I know personally was abducted this weekend. So yeah, that was a long answer, but it's not something to be celebrated. And it's a tactic to try to get us to stop organizing.
So, Bill, going back to your historical lens here, we see people acting in a way that suggests that Minnesota has a history of embracing immigrants right now. Has that always been the case for this state?
Minnesota is really proud of its history of embracing immigrants. That's been true to a greater or lesser extent, depending on when you're talking about. But certainly, immigrants have been coming to Minnesota since the first European Americans arrived, and in the last 40 or 50 years, we've really received new groups of refugees coming from places like Laos and Southeast Asia or Somalia that has really changed the demographics of the state in a way that I think, for the most part, Minnesotans have really welcomed. Certainly, you can point to examples where that's not true, particularly after 9/11. The Somali population was faced a lot of discrimination and anger in a way that wasn't really fair to them. They hadn't been part of what had happened on September 11th, but because they were Muslim, they faced a lot of persecution. Germans in World War I faced a lot of persecution from organizations like the Minnesota Committee on Public Safety that was created by the state government to really assist with focusing the war effort, but turned into this committee of basically persecuting people who were perceived as disloyal, and that certainly included Germans and German Americans in the state. So this Minnesota, like much of the rest of the nation, sort of has moments of expansiveness where immigrants are welcomed, and moments where there's a lot of fear and suspicion where immigrants are rejected or persecuted. I would say, in the most part, lately we've felt like we've been very expansive, and I think that's one of the things that has made people come together, is that the people who are being persecuted right now by ICE they're not foreigners. They're our neighbors. They're the people who we see and work with and go to the store with every day, and that feels different to me in the sense that we do pride ourselves in welcoming immigrants.
Right, and as you mentioned, just a history of being a place where refugees resettle too certainly has contributed to the diversity of our state in the last several decades. Yeah, and we're talking tonight about protest and collective action in general to documenting ICE activities, but also to support people who've been affected in one way or another by this immigration crackdown. Does this surprise you about Minnesotans, Bill, that they have been so engaged when you look at Minnesota's history around protest?
As far back as you want to go, I would say that Minnesotans are very engaged in activism and protest and community engagement. There is a tradition in Minnesota of this kind of activism and engagement. And, going all the way back to the 1840s and 1850s with the abolition movement, there's a very strong abolition movement in Minnesota in places like St. Anthony and St. Paul, working to emancipate enslaved African Americans. Certainly in the 1870s and 1880s, there were farmers' movements that were protesting against railroads and monopolies. Labor movements in the 19-teens and 1920s, strong unionization going all the way into the 1930s and beyond.
The DFL is the Democratic Labor Party.
Right. The Democratic Farmer Labor Party comes out of a tradition of protest, right, of workers and farmers who are discontent with the status quo, discontent with the big business that they felt was dominating the state, and banding together politically as a form of political protest to try and get better representation in the government.
So, Bill, why do you think Minnesotans are so civically engaged? Like, what is it about the social fabric of the state that makes them prone to being that way?
Well, there are a lot of different factors of that. Some of that has to do with some of those Scandinavian immigrants who came in the 1800s who brought a tradition of socialism and social involvement with them. It has to do with this tradition of farmers and workers banding together to build better lives for themselves, to work to make sure that their government and that the businesses that were in Minnesota were treating them well, that everybody had equality and equal opportunity. Those are ideas that have been important to Minnesotans. You look at the political tradition that creates leaders like Hubert Humphrey coming out of this, or Paul Wellstone. These are people who are really strongly engaged in equality and issues of civil rights and issues of equal opportunity. And Minnesota really has a national reputation as a result of that.
If you're just joining our conversation, we are talking about Minnesota's history of protests and civic engagement and how it connects to today's actions around ICE enforcement in the Twin Cities and beyond. If you are protesting, volunteering, or observing for the first time, we want to hear from you. If you've done it in the past, we want to know if this moment feels different to you. And I'm especially interested in hearing from young people who may be protesting or organizing for the first time. What has been your experience? Join our conversation at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. We have Stefan from Coleraine on the line. Stefan, what do you want to share with us?
Oh, I kind of was wondering if anyone wanted to hear a little opposition. Or are we just
absolutely.
Doing the backslapping? Well,
no, go for it.
Organizing a protest is where you go down to City Hall and you get a permit, and you put everyone out there with their message, and you collect up everyone's opinions, and you get in there and you express yourself so that the rest of the people who couldn't make it to the protest can get the other side of the story. Not go in there and poke your finger in the chest and try to be the story. That's not protesting. And when I hear people talk about what's legal, it's they're not lawyers. The young people and the activists should not be taking legal advice from the host of a talk show or from the commentary on the 5 o'clock news. This is something that someone planted to try to paint their view of the world the way they feel it should be. It is not accurate. You cannot call this,
Stefan,
unless you wanted to tell us that all these laws, all these immigration laws were done fraudulently, or that you want to challenge the constitutionality of the immigration laws. These people are here to enforce the law because our local officials were not willing to enforce the law.
So, Stefan, I think what I hear you saying, and it is a criticism that I, actually live and work in Greater Minnesota. It's something that I run into, which is that some of the tactics that the ICE observers and protesters have used, you feel are too aggressive. Is that fair?
No, illegal. They're not legal.
Okay. I want to ask Jack what she makes, or I'm sorry, what they make of this comment, because Jack, we are seeing situations where things get heated. We're seeing situations where ICE observers are using whistles, and I don't feel like that's new, but it does feel like it sort of raises some tension in the moment. I mean, how are organizations like yours maybe advising people on how they should approach these potentially very tense situations and deadly situations, as we've seen?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure exactly what the caller was referring to when he was saying things were illegal, but just observing what an agent is doing is not illegal. Blowing a whistle to let people know that ICE is around or honking your horn is not illegal. Following behind from a safe distance is not illegal. And HSI, to me personally, and to a lot of people, has been trying to say that this is illegal for the past 2 months, and they have not succeeded. So, yeah, I'm not sure what that guy was referring to. Yeah.
Well, and Jack, I did want to, and I talked to Bill about this too. One thing I've noticed in these protests is that people are often using music or, we've talked about the whistles. Like, what are some of the tools that people are using both to protest and draw attention to what they're seeing play out on their street?
Yeah, I mean, I think the singing can be very powerful. Doing the huge march that happened on the 23rd and then another one that happened on the 30th a week later, people coming together and collectively raising their voices is very powerful. And also just expanding it beyond protesting, like all of the different ways that community is showing up for each other right now is just so extremely powerful. Like people cooking food for each other, giving each other rides, providing groceries for your neighbors who can't leave the house, doing rent funds, like hyperlocal rent funds for your block. All of these are examples of collective power, and they're definitely not illegal.
All right, we're going to take another call now from Ganelle in Woodbury. Ganelle, what do you want to share with us?
I agree completely with what the previous caller said. As I told your screener, getting involved is not a civic right. At this point in time, it is a civic responsibility. We all need to stand up and do what we are able and take another step. You'll be surprised at how much more you can do. I'm listening to you as I drive around the Twin Cities tonight, delivering boxes of food, baby supplies, household supplies, medicine to families who are too afraid to leave their home. Some of them are citizens. Some of them are immigrants who are here legally. We don't ask. But these are people who our government has made it so that they are afraid to step out of their front door. So when this is what we have to fight. And I'm fighting it by letting these people feel safe and seen and cared for with a whole group of people. We drive around to 60 to 100 homes a day with boxes of fresh food and diapers and household goods. That's what we're doing. We're just feeding our neighbors.
And Ganelle, how did you find a network to be able to do that? I'm guessing you didn't just know where to go. How did you link up with this?
No, it was actually through social media. I was on a hyper local group, and somebody piped in and said, "Hey, my cousin's restaurant. She has workers who are too afraid to leave. If you have a couple some rice and beans." This started a little over a month ago, and this woman is amazing, and she has developed a cadre of about 100 volunteers. We've got a website. We have a signal chat. We have groups of drivers. We have gatherers. There's a small restaurant, and I don't want to say where it is because ICE does watch us.
It's okay.
I've seen them.
Yeah.
And she gave us half of her restaurant to collect our donations. And we have people who build the boxes. We want to make sure that people have some dignity in this and some agency. So we have a form they can fill out online, and it's all word of mouth. It's all grassroots.
Ganelle, thank you so much. We're getting more calls coming, and I really want to have an opportunity to get to all of them. But thank you for sharing all of that with us. You know, Bill, Ganelle makes an interesting point. When we think of protests and we think about the history of protests in Minnesota, I think the vision that comes to people's mind is, you're out there holding a sign, you're marching down the street, you maybe have a chant you're doing. Do you see what Ganelle is doing and her friends are doing as an act of protest? And is that something new?
Yeah, absolutely. I was sitting and listening to Ganelle and listening to what Jack was saying and thinking about how they're part of a really respectable tradition of protest in Minnesota. I'm sitting here thinking about the American Indian movement in the 1960s. AIM was founded in Minneapolis in the 1960s by a group of Native Americans who were protesting against police violence in North Minneapolis. Both African Americans, people of color, in fact, Latinos, African Americans faced some pretty intense police violence in Minnesota at the time. And one of the ways that AIM responded to that was by creating community patrols that walked around their neighborhoods and just kept an eye on people and made sure that people had what they needed. They were certainly monitoring the police, and there are so many parallels between what these AIM patrols were doing in the 1960s and 70s and what activists are doing today in terms of observing the police. and keeping them on notice that their actions were being watched. And I just think it's so interesting because we talk about
But without phones, right?
See, that's the thing.
Without real-time information.
Without social media. But what they were using were walkie-talkies, and they were using two-way radios, and they were using couriers, and they were staying connected so that they would know where police activity was taking place. And it's kind of this strange parallel of Native American activists using technology to keep an eye on their neighborhood, to monitor police activity, and to protest. There are so many forms of protest. You can march, you can boycott, you can strike. But you can also help neighbors. You can anything that is designed to stand up against the status quo, an unacceptable status quo, can be considered protest. Voting, forming political parties, political activism are forms of have historically been forms of protest in Minnesota and elsewhere in the United States. So that the range of activities you can do and consider it protest is pretty spectacular.
Yeah. If you're just joining our conversation, we are talking about Minnesota's history of protests and civic engagement and how it connects to what we're seeing right now during the Trump administration's immigration enforcement efforts here. My guests are Bill Convery. He is the Director of Research for the Minnesota Historical Society. And Jack Kovarik is a resident of South Minneapolis who volunteers as an operator for the Monarca Rapid Response Line. That's a community-run hotline that Minnesotans can call to report federal immigration enforcement activity. And we want you to join our conversation. If you are protesting, volunteering, or observing for the first time, give us a call. Or if you have in the past and you feel like this moment is different, we want to hear from you as well. Join our conversation. Call us at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. We have Adrian in Lakeville on the line. Adrian, what do you want to share?
Hi, yeah, thank you for having me. I'd like to share that, after Renee Good was killed, that was the first time that I had protested. And as a person of color, I was afraid to be out, to be, potentially around ICE agents closer, in Minneapolis. But I'm a citizen, and I recognize that there's power in showing up and protesting and standing up for your neighbors here in Minnesota and across the country. So it felt very worth it. It was amazing to see just the community and the number of people that came out to protest, and we saw that again last week. And so I think it's a great thing to show up for your community and also see that,
Adrian,
yeah, go
Adrian,
ahead.
I'm really curious. You said this is the first time you've gotten involved in. I mean, was there one thing that happened that sort of prompted you to get involved? And it sounds like you're younger. I mean, sometimes people think younger people are sort of apathetic, but that has not been your story. It sounds like.
Yeah. So the last time I wanted to but didn't was when George Floyd was killed, and that was during the pandemic. I was living with older people at the time and didn't want to risk getting them sick. And so now that we're no longer as worried about COVID-19, we know how to respond, and that wasn't obviously a concern this time around. I felt comfortable going out there.
Right. The pandemic. Yes, that was another historical thing that was happening simultaneously a few years ago. Jack, the caller, Adrian here, raises, she brought up George Floyd, right? And I cannot get out of my mind, the connection between what we're seeing right now and what we saw in the days and weeks after George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis. And even before that, we had seen a lot of fatal police encounters with people of color and specifically Black men, Jamar Clark, Philando Castile. Do you see a connection between the infrastructure that's sort of being activated right now and those previous incidences, Jack?
Yes, absolutely. Full disclosure, I moved here in 2022, so I was not here when George Floyd was killed. I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time and watching it from there, and was in awe of what Minneapolis was doing from afar, which I think about how a lot of people are feeling that way now. Even still, though, that I was not here, I feel very directly how I am benefiting from structures that were created or were strengthened during the uprising in 2020. Just as an example, I live in South Minneapolis, not far from George Floyd Square, and just on my block, there are 2 block captains who became block captains in 2020 after George Floyd was killed. And when a couple raids happened in St. Paul in November of last year, I connected with those people, and they made me the 3rd block captain, partially because they're both
What does it mean to be a
older.
block captain? I don't want to go down too much of a rabbit hole here, but for someone who might be tuning in and doesn't know what that is, how would you define a block captain?
Yeah, I mean, you can call it whatever you want. Captain is kind of a silly word, but it's just people on your block who are taking a little bit more of the reins of making sure that that we know each other as neighbors. We are all in a WhatsApp chat so we can ask each other for butter, or if my dog gets out, I can let my neighbors know to look for my dog, like that kind of a thing. Then in moments like this, we're also, checking in with especially our immigrant neighbors to make sure that they have what they need, help them with rent right now, make sure they have food. So yeah, those structures, like I was saying, both of the people on my block who were block captains became block captains in 2020. So that's like a very concrete example of that infrastructure that is still, being used today. Mm-hmm.
And Bill, what about you? What connections do you see to previous incidents, in more recent history and what we're seeing right now?
I think people are making a lot, and rightly so, of sort of the spontaneity of protests that people who, like our previous caller, had never thought of being involved in protests before are stepping up. And I think there is a lot of that kind of decentralization of just individuals making a choice that they're not going to stand for the status quo, and they want to do something about it. I also think that the protest movement in Minnesota has benefited from the creation of networks, of community networks, of support networks, of protest networks that unfortunately date back to the 2015s with the police murder of Philando Castile and George Floyd and others. We had already built a protest infrastructure on top of a neighborhood community support infrastructure that wasn't necessarily geared towards protest, but is reorienting. I think of organizations like the West Side Coalition in St. Paul that have been around for decades in many cases, but can mobilize in a situation like this because they're already organized. They already have their communication networks in place. We have learned a lot in Minnesota about the infrastructure of protest over the last decade, unfortunately, but it's benefiting those who are working to make a change through protest right now.
We have Daniel in Hopkins on the line. Daniel, what do you want to share?
Hi. Yeah. I just want to say that I feel motivated to go out and to protest in order to give money to help people with what's going on right now. And I guess to give you a little bit of a background, I was graduating high school during after the George Floyd murder, and I didn't necessarily feel like I wanted to be involved at that time because I think at that time I personally felt like a lot of the protests or a lot of the actions that was going on with a lot of my classmates online and stuff, I think felt very performative at that time in terms of people were posting like black squares on Instagram. There was right Democrats in Congress that were kneeling with sort of kente cloth. And I think at that time, I felt that there was like a very performative aura to a lot of the action that was being taken. Whereas I think now, because everybody's lives are literally at risk, right? Everybody's going out and doing concrete things. And I think that really motivated me to go out there and protest with people because this really is the first time that I think everybody feels like their lives are on the line and that there's actionable things that we can do and that we can call for. So that really motivates me to go out there and to do things.
And so tell me a little bit. So you were a high schooler when George Floyd was killed and there were protests. And now you're a bit older. Like what has been your experience in being involved in some of these protests now?
So I guess I haven't been like physically involved, but I've been helping out financially in terms of helping people and making sure, right, everybody in my family is okay and that other people in the community are okay. But it definitely, I think, gives you this feeling that you have to do it, because if you don't, right, I think there's a two-way feeling of, if you go out and protest, right, you might potentially get killed. And even if you don't go out there and you might not protest, right, some people still might get killed, right? There's a thing where it's damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Well, thank you so much, Daniel. Bill, I want to go back to you because I feel like this word neighborly, or, taking care of neighbors, like this phrase is being tossed around a lot. And I'm a transplant from the South. I did not grow up here. I feel like there's definitely a culture of neighborliness that I've encountered since I've lived here for some time. But also, I feel like, Minnesotans maybe have a reputation for being like non-confrontational and yet there's this strong history of protest. So is there anything sort of uniquely Minnesotan that you see when you're looking at pictures or videos of Minnesotans protesting, especially in, I don't know, what was it, negative 21-degree weather on the 23rd of January when there was that huge march in Minneapolis? Right.
While we're all being honest, I'm a transplant as well from Colorado.
We're all transplants.
So none of us are really qualified to talk about this, but here we go. There is that stereotype of Minnesota nice, right? Which means a couple of things. It's a good thing in that people are very pleasant and they are, willing to help each other out and help shovel each other's sidewalks and things like that, help each other move their cars out of a snowbank. But it's also seen as a kind of a form of passive aggression too, right? That it can be seen as a shield of very reticent people. I think when George Floyd was killed, there was a lot of examination of this idea of Minnesota nice, and what does that really mean? And for some people, it means kind of putting up barriers and walls to actually making substantial social or political change. And so it was also seen as kind of a bad thing. I think what we're learning is that Minnesotans are nice until they're not, and that you can only push them so far. And I think kind of the Minnesota nice, the quality of that is really working right now is that kind of inherent sense of decency and that inherent sense of right and wrong and knowing wrong when you see it. I think that's something that Minnesotans pride themselves in, and they're being pushed on that. And I think when Minnesotans are pushed historically on intolerable situations, they push back, and we definitely saw at that big protest when it was 20 below, 10 below, that Minnesotans are really proud of being people who can take it, right? Who can take that cold weather, right? That is like the very first thing I noticed about Minnesotans when I came here. The first winter I was here, it got down to 35 below, and I thought, how can people even live in this? And the fact is they do, and they thrive in it. And so, if you push a Minnesotan in cold weather, you better watch out, I think is the lesson.
Yeah. Okay, we have Ivan in Rochester on the line. Ivan, what do you want to share?
Hello. Hi, I just wanted to share. Thank you for having me on. I'd like to say that I think I'm more of a point person here in Rochester. Obviously, it's a smaller city. It's considered, the third largest city in Minnesota. And we do see a lot of that influx of ICE agents that come down here when there's protests happening up in the cities, right? It seems like when it shuts down, like they move towards smaller cities, and it affects us as well. So a lot of the times it feels like, we're alone in this. But we've actually started a whole observing group. We have various groups here, a lot of people that are watching, a lot of people that are reporting directly to me. The one good thing about me is that I'm bilingual. I can speak Spanish, so I get a lot of these reports directly from people that are, calling to have us show up just so that there's no violence, because they see the violence happening in Minneapolis and how they're acting, right? So this is one of the things that people are concerned, is that violence has reached down all the way to Rochester, and it just affects everyone. It makes everyone so mad and so scared. Rochester feels like a ghost town. It feels like COVID times. Businesses are struggling. There's literally mothers who are citizens who haven't gotten a chance to renew their IDs because they've been too busy being a mom, right? things like that you don't think about. People that, haven't renewed or haven't gotten their birth certificates or have lost them, right? They're even scared of going out. So a lot of the times as observers, we're also giving rides, we're giving things like that, but there's been incidents here in Rochester where there has been full-on guns drawn to people, pulling U.S. citizens over that are U.S. citizens. I mean, I don't know if I can rephrase that enough, but there is people that are U.S. citizens that have been taken to the Whipple building. And it's just very frustrating because,
Ivan, thank you. I mean, I'm glad you called in, Ivan. I mean, yes, NPR and many other media outlets have documented U.S. citizens being detained and taken to the Whipple building at this point. But Ivan also raises the important point that this is not contained in the Twin Cities. I am also in Rochester, and we have seen ICE enforcement here. We've seen it in Mankato. We've seen it in Wilmer, in many, far more rural places. And Jack, I want to read you a headline from some of the reporting that we did today that I think is relevant. And it's this: after 2 months of the ICE surge, nearly 30,000 people are now trained observers in 77 of the 87 counties in Minnesota. I think that's a metric to show that this isn't just happening in the Twin Cities. What do you make of that statistic? Does it surprise you that these trainings and these observers are happening outside of the Twin Cities?
No, it doesn't surprise me. I saw that headline today, by the way, and I liked it and
great.
I reposted it. Yeah, I mean, personally, I've been getting more involved with observing in the suburbs, so closer to the cities, but not the Twin Cities proper. And the organizing is just as deep there. It's beefing up, especially the last month. And just talking about Monarca and also Copal and the Immigrant Defense Network, they all lead their own version of constitutional observer trainings. The Immigrant Defense Network started like a caravan a couple weeks ago where they're doing trainings all across the country and going to other cities and other states to give their trainings. And Monarca has been doing trainings in other cities in Minnesota, like up in the Twin Ports and in northern Minnesota, and also in southern. They did one in Rochester as well. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I'm happy that we're reporting numbers on it, though. It's great to see it.
And Bill, what about you? Again, it feels like that culture of protest is sort of an urban thing. Are you surprised to know that so many people in greater Minnesota have been trained to be ICE observers?
No, I'm not surprised, to be honest. You look at our history, and protest takes place everywhere, whether it's up in the Iron Range in the 19-teens, when there were a number of really intense labor strikes, places like New Ulm, where the German-American population in World War I protested against the draft, sending German Americans to fight against their families, or Wilmer in the 1970s when 8 women protested the unfair labor issues that were the sex discrimination that was going on in Wilmer, and went out again on an extremely cold winter day to basically picket their work, the Wilmer 8. So this tradition of protest exists really in every corner of the state in one way or another.
Okay. We have Max in Lakeville on the line. Max, what do you want to share?
Hi, yes. I actually had a question pointed towards Bill. I am a high school teacher, and obviously this is sort of history in the making, so I'm kind of wondering how should we talk about this or how would you suggest talking about this with students, especially approaching it at like an age-appropriate level for them while still talking about this? Because I feel like we are long past being able to ignore this anymore.
Yeah, well, that is a great question. And at the Minnesota Historical Society, we're struggling about how to talk about this because it's still playing out, right? We don't know how this is going to end yet. And so, like everyone else, what we're really doing is we're documenting what's going on. I think one of the things that you can do is talk about the historical perspective and the history of protest in Minnesota. And you can get on online web resources like Minipedia and learn about Minnesota protest movements and strikes, and talk about the parallels or compare and contrast the differences between, say, the 1934 truckers' strike in Minneapolis, of which there are some extraordinary parallels, but also some real differences. You can talk about the ways that protest formulate? How does protest come together? How is it organized? What are the tipping points of protest? And you can make those comparisons to what's going on today. Minnesota has a rich protest history, and there's a lot to draw on from our historical record in terms of how you can speak about this with kids. But how this is going to play out, we don't know. We're living in it.
Bill, I'm so curious. What are you talking about with your colleagues about what you will collect, especially when so much of it is digital and kind of ephemeral, too?
Right. Well, ephemeral material, that the digital age has been a nightmare for archivists. We are maybe a more literate society than we've been maybe ever in terms of people writing and communicating through writing. At the same time, so much of it is ephemeral that we can only capture a tiny bit of that. And, there are two lines of thought about how historical organizations such as MNHS react to this. One is to start collecting right away and collect and get in the community and start taping oral histories and collecting material, protest signs or posters or other materials of the protest. There's another one, which I think is what we're doing right now, which is we want a little perspective to understand the direction that this is going in and make sure that we understand what the really important objects are, because what we can collect is limited. It's just we can only get a tiny little bit of the historical material that's actually produced right now. So we want to understand what the trajectory of this is so that we make sure that we're getting the really significant objects or stories as part of this. So we're watching and waiting right now. We need a little perspective before we can go forward. There's kind of a positive and negative to both of those approaches. Collecting right away, you get material that's fresh. Waiting a little bit, you might lose important objects because they get lost over time. And so you always have to strike a balance.
Jack, I want to talk to you just a little bit about the technology here. And, I think back to the Arab Spring, they were using, Twitter and other tools to communicate about what was happening there in the protests. But it sometimes feels like the documentation aspect of this and the instantaneous information is a little bit of a blessing and a curse, because obviously we're also living in an age of misinformation. So how have you viewed the use of encrypted messaging systems, just live streaming, like our caller Ivan was talking about some of the encounters he's had here in Rochester? Is it a good thing or a bad thing in terms of, coalescing people and getting people activated?
Overall positive, I would say. They're just tools. They're not perfect. Filming right now is huge. It breaks my heart to think about what the government would have said about Renee Good if it wasn't filmed from multiple angles. And every time an ICE agent comes up to my vehicle, my passenger is filming. Anytime, even if we're just falling behind ICE, we're filming. We have a GoPro in the front and in the back. So just from a legal perspective and what HSI and DHS would try to say about us if we didn't have footage, that's huge. And it's a very invaluable tool. And I recommend anyone who's interacting with federal agents to be filming the interaction. Signal, we joke a lot that we're using it past its limits. I also wonder, it's a free app. People have not used Signal this much until now, and I'm curious how that is benefiting Signal as a corporation. It's interesting, but we are using it way past its limits. We know what the chat limit is, the call limits are. Phones are if you don't have enough space, it'll just freeze and shut down because you're in so many chats. So it's not perfect. And also, even though it is encrypted and it's better than just, using Meta or text message, SMS, it's not perfect. So even when we're in a chat, even if we think it's vetted, we're always thinking there could be an infiltrator in here. There have been infiltrators, and it's best to assume that there's people in the chats that aren't friendly. So you also just got to use your brain when you're using the tools.
We have time for one more call here from Brandon in St. Paul. Brandon, what do you want to share?
Hi, I just wanted to kind of provide some context as somebody who's done organizing for about the last 15 years. I work in affordable housing now, but I've been involved in a lot of elections and issue campaigns. And what's remarkable about to me about this moment is that I almost feel like I can't keep up. And as somebody who has been historically in my time in Minnesota been tapped in, whether socially or through the work that I do in organizing, that's a really new experience. And so I just sort of wanted to frame that, because I think if this is sort of your first time doing something like this, doing these mutual aid actions or the commuting and the observing, if this is your first time, you might be looking around thinking, okay, so, how historic or how big of a thing this is. And I know Bill's there to go a little further back than me, but just someone on the ground, I just have to say it's breathtaking. I've never seen more involvement from people. It's never been easier and also hard to be an organizer. It's never been easier to just convince people to come out. It's been wonderful.
But Brandon, and I'm wondering, are you seeing a diversity of people interested in doing this that might be unexpected?
Oh, absolutely. The conversations that I have with people who tell me this is their first protest. I was on a plane, actually, to go on vacation, and I had just seen the news about Alex Preddy, and my wife and I were sitting there and starting to actually weep. And this man who was sitting beside me, we struck up a conversation because he saw what was on my phone. And he said, I've never been to a protest till this summer, and I can't believe it. And, we talked for about 2 hours after that. I mean, the people that I see, the unity is unbelievable to me.
Thank you so much, Brandon. We have just a couple minutes left, but I want to get both of your takes on this. One thing we've been hearing from people that we're reporting, talking to in our reporting, is that they may be civically engaged for the first time in ways that they haven't, but also they're like getting to know their neighbors in a different way. Maybe they're communicating or meeting people down the street who they always have lived near, but now they're, getting to know them through these mutual aid networks. And, Jack, I'll start with you. I mean, what do you think is the lasting effect of that? And then, Bill, I want to hear your historical perspective on that, too.
I mean, it's powerful. I think that we're seeing a mass movement in the United States that feels like something that hasn't happened in the United States. I see remnants of like leftist movements in Latin America, especially how student unions at the U are really pushing forward to extend the strike and not messing around, doing really awesome protests at the Graduate Hotel repeatedly, despite MPD arresting them. That's just one thing.
And a
that
lot of
feels
high school walkouts,
yes,
too, right?
high school
we've
student
seen those
walkouts.
Yeah.
And there's just like so many things that it feels exciting, and it feels. I totally agree with the previous caller. Part of the reason why this moment is so powerful is that every single person is tapping in the way that makes sense for them, and it's the diversity of tactics and the overlapping tactics that makes it so powerful. Yeah.
Bill, we just have a little bit of time left here. I'm wondering what you think the networks that are being created right now, how they're going to play out in our communities going forward.
Yeah, it's always difficult for historians to predict the future. In fact, it's malpractice for us to predict the future. So what I will say is this: this is a good time to remember. This year is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and this is a time to remember that America was built on protest. Right, whether it was the Stamp Act protests or the Boston Tea Party, the American Revolution was itself a protest. We baked the right to protest into the Constitution, the right of free speech, the right to peaceably assemble, the right to petition our government to redress grievances. These are protest rights. This is who we are as Americans, and there is nothing more American than to be dissatisfied with the status quo and go out and do something about it.
Okay. Well, our time is up for tonight. I really want to thank our guests. We had Bill Convery. He is the Director of Research for the Minnesota Historical Society. And Jack Kovarik is a resident of South Minneapolis who volunteers as an operator for the Monarca Rapid Response Line. This conversation was produced by Carrie Dwyer. Just a reminder that NPR's Winter Member Drive is coming up next week, but you won't hear extended messages from NPR News. Instead, we'll continue to cover the local news you need without interruption. But your support is needed. Donate before the drive begins at nprnews.org. Have a good evening.
I'm NPR News Politics Editor Brian Baxt. Join me every Friday at noon for in-depth coverage of the 2026 legislative session. The new season of Politics Friday starts February 6th.